Hi students. In this video, I want to review some techniques for integrating research in your essay. By now you have found a lot of research, a lot of good information that you want to share with your readers. So I want to go over some ways to make sure that you are making the most out of that information and that your readers are getting out of it what you want them to get out of it. Let's start with some basic reminders. Don't forget, whenever you're using research, to give credit to all of your sources. So when you use exact words from a source, remember to put them in quotation marks. And if you are using just their ideas, if you're paraphrasing or summarizing them in your own words, remember that you also have to cite the authors for that information as well. So you will have a lot of citations throughout your essay, hopefully at least one or two in most of your body paragraphs. And then also remember, don't let quotations take over your writing. Make sure that most of the words in every body paragraph and every paragraph in your essay are your own. If you find that you're letting quotations do too much of the work, then see if you can convert some of them to paraphrase. Put the ideas into your own words. Okay? So let's talk about quotation sandwiches. You may have heard or seen me in my feedback to you use the term quotation sandwich. This is a term that I have borrowed from English professors Kathy Birkenstein and Gerald Graff. And the metaphor of a sandwich is basically the quotation is the filling. So if it's a ham sandwich, the quotation is the ham. Your words, though, are the pieces of bread on either side of that ham, right? Because the ham itself is one thing, but if you want the full sandwich, you have to have your own words surrounding that. So let's look at a couple of examples. Notice here I've highlighted the way that I lead into this quotation. As many English professors will tell you, finding relevant quotations is only part of your job. You also need to present them in a way that makes their relevance and meaning clear to your readers. One way to do that is to use quotation sandwiches. Smoothly introduce your quotations and then follow up by connecting them to your point. So notice in this example, I have begun with a lead-in instead of beginning with quotation marks. I've put a lead-in at the beginning. I have my citation because I haven't provided the author's names in my lead-in, so I cite them in parentheses along with the page number. In this case, we have a page number. And then I've also got a follow-up here. Let's look at another example. Again, I have highlighted the lead-in. English professors Kathy Birkenstein and Gerald Graff explain why it's important to carefully introduce quotations. In a way, quotations are orphans, words that have been taken from their original context and that need to be integrated into their new textual surroundings. Introducing quotations helps readers get the most out of the research that you've done. I like that idea of thinking about quotations as orphans, so you need to make them feel at home in your paragraph by surrounding them with your own words. Notice too in the citation that I don't need to repeat the author's names in parentheses because I've already said them. In this case, because there's a page number, I do provide that. Another example. According to They Say, I Say, an often used text in composition classrooms, framing a quotation can help readers understand not just why the words are important, but also why the source is credible. So I want to point out a couple things in the lead-in here that I've highlighted. Notice how in this case I haven't said the author's names, but I have pointed to a title of the publication. Sometimes you have a credible sounding publication like the New York Times or the Journal of New England Medicine or something credible like that. So you might want to call attention to the publication if you think that's going to impress your readers, in which case you cite the authors again at the end of the quotation. Notice here that most of what I have is paraphrase, but I'm still giving them credit by citing their names in the in-text citation at the end. So, templates, some patterns that you can do this. The most common probably is according to blank, and then follow up with something like this supports the idea that blah, 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 and return to the point or the topic of the paragraph. Help the reader see how the quotation supports your point. In this template, there's a blank for the source's name and also a blank to point out their credentials. So you might say, according to Mary Garcia, a professor of biology at Harvard University, something like that, okay? Joe Schmo, a leading expert in international relations, points out that blah, blah, blah. So notice you can tell us who the source's credentials are, because when your source looks good, you look good. Okay? The excerpt that I assigned of They Say, I Say, that I've posted for you, has more ideas, more templates like this that you could use. Okay, so a next level template, you might have already noticed in my example that I did this, is to make a claim, have a colon, and then the quotation, okay? Make a claim, and then provide a quotation that directly supports them, but link them with a colon. If you remember, punctuation tells us relationships between ideas, and a colon announces that explanatory material is coming. Okay? So this formula, claim colon quotation, can work if the claim that you make before the colon is a complete sentence. Let's look at another example. Scholars Birkenstein and Graff tell us that sometimes quotations don't need much follow-up. As a general rule, the most explanatory framing is needed for quotations that may be hard for readers to process. Notice I forgot my closed quotation marks there. Oops. Trying to make that go away. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go back. I forgot the quotation marks at the end of the quotation right before the page number. So notice here I am making a claim. Scholars Birkenstein and Graff tell us blah, blah, blah. And then I'm linking that claim with a colon to the quotation that directly supports the claim. That's some next level template there for integrating your quotations, for leading into a quotation. And then again, sometimes the quotation just speaks for itself. You might not need to follow up if the quotation is so super clear to your readers. Generally, though, follow up and connect it to your point. All right. So you might remember in your source analysis worksheets that the last question is to put the source in conversation with other sources. How is it like other things that you've read? How is it unlike other things that you've read? Where does it agree and disagree with other sources? I want you to take that same skill that you've been practicing in those worksheets and see if you can use it in your paper. Remember, there's a line about this in the rubric for the assignment. So one way to do this is to make a claim. Research suggests that blah, 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 and cite two authors, author X and author Y. Remember, as I said in the MLA video, that if you do that, you use a semicolon to connect those two authors. That semicolon tells us that they are two authors of two separate pieces instead of co-authors of the same piece. Okay, here's another example. Multiple studies have concluded that blah, 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 and then you can cite in parentheses the authors who have done the studies who have made that conclusion. Here's another way. X has shown that blah, 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 blah. Similarly, Y has found that blah, blah, blah. Notice how you can draw connections between sources when you find more than one source has found something out that can help you in your paper. Or both X and Y agree. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? You could also show disagreement. While X argues that blah, 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 Z would disagree, claiming that blah, blah, blah. Or in contrast to X, Z has found that. So do you see how these kinds of, this kind of writing in your paper can help show us that you're doing some next level thinking about your sources. You are thinking so carefully that you're noticing patterns of agreement and patterns of disagreement. Okay, let's just review a few technical things before I end the video. Just based on what I've already seen in your writing, one thing that I'd like to review with you is when to use quoted in. Remember that if you're using a quotation that your source used, you need to use quoted in your citation so that we know where to find the source on your works cited list. Let me give you an example. We've already been working with the book by Birkenstein and Graff, but they quote this guy named Steve Benton. And I like what Steve Benton has to say, so I want to use his idea, right? According to educator Steve Benton, hint and run quotations are those that aren't introduced smoothly, just left there by the writer. Now, if I left off the citation at the end, I would go to the works, my readers would go to the works cited list and look for Benton, but he's not going to be there because he's not the author. He's somebody my author quoted. So this quoted in the citation signals where to look on the works cited list for the source. but I'm also giving credit to the person who said the words, Steve Benton. Okay? Remember that your works cited list has to correspond with the sources cited in your paper, so this helps. This is reviewed, and other technical things are reviewed in your nuts and bolts handout. And then just a few quick basics for your works cited list. We'll review some of the nitty-gritty details later in the semester. Remember to provide an entry on your list for each source that you cite in your essay. And remember that you can make your list more user-friendly by doing a couple basic things. Put the sources in alphabetical order according to the last name. So the author's last name appears first. If your source doesn't have an author, that should be no author, then you alphabetize according to the title. Okay, and your in-text citation will also include that title, so it's easy to find on your works cited list. The basic format for articles is author, last name first, period, title of the article in quotation marks, period, the title of the publication in italics, the date, and the URL. Now, these seem like super minor, picky little itty-bitty details. But the reason that they're important is that your reader can tell a lot about the way that your source is formatted. So when you follow this order, your reader can tell something about that source. Again, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that later this semester. Okay? For sources that you get from library databases, remember after the date, you provide the name of the database and either the URL or the DOI. Remember that you can choose the option of having the database format your citation for you. But when you include the name of the database, you have told me that you've met the requirement to have at least one or two or whatever the requirement is for a given paper to have a certain number of database sources. If you have more questions, see pages 7 through 9 in our nuts and bolts handout. And there's my works cited list. Notice how I've started with the first author's last name. I've got the basics for that source. That's all I need. Okay, so if you have any questions about any of this, review the handout, review the sample essay and the video I made about that, and obviously you should always feel welcome to email me with anything else. I hope your drafting and your revising go well, and I'm looking forward to reading what you come up with.